Welcome to yet another Merck Studios live session. Once again, we are digging deep into the topic of software modernization. However, today we are going to focus on design. My name is Alexandra. I'll be your host today, and joining me are two very special guests, Jagoda, our senior UX designer and team leader.
Hi.
And Michał, our senior business analyst and sales representatives. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you today?
Good. I guess the
Very
weather
good.
outside gives the Christmas vibes already, so I guess the moods are set up for this.
Perfect. I'm really happy to have you here today. Let me do some housekeeping first. So today's session is going to be divided into two parts. The first will be our discussion, and then we'll take some questions during the Q&A. So don't forget to leave your questions and comments in the chat box. We'll answer them after the discussion. This live stream is, as the name suggests, live, but you will be able to rewatch it afterwards. So don't worry if you have any errands to run or maybe a dog to walk. We'll be there with the recording later on. So as I said at the beginning, today we are focusing on design in software modernization. We're going to discuss things like favorable conditions for design to become outdated, the business impact of legacy design, and some pro tips for keeping your digital product up to date. Okay, so I think we can move on to the introductions. Jagoda, Michał, could you tell us a few words about yourselves, what you do at Merck Studio, and about your experience? Jagoda, could you begin?
Sure. So I'm an UX designer at Merck Studio, and I work in the product design department. So this is the place when we handle the interface and end-to-end interface and user experience solutions for our clients and products and their companies.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael. I work for Merck Studio as a business analyst. A business analyst's task is to navigate the yearly talks that we have with the different companies that reach out to us in order to gather and understand their requirements and advise on the best steps to take in order to meet them.
Okay, thank you very much for the introductions. So I think we can start with the first question. And let me make it a bit difficult for you because I want to start with something kind of big and kind of philosophical. Tell me, is software design ever finished? Is there any point at which you can say, okay, my design is finished, I don't have to take care of it anymore?
I would say this is the, as you said, like kind of big question. And definitely we would love to live in a world where the design can just be ended in one day, and we should not be worried about it ever again. When it comes to design itself, I think in the perspective of modernization, there will be like a very I would say commonly used parallel in this life when it comes to the design. It is similar to development in that way, I would say. In general, in Agile and Scrum approaches, we love to encapsulate things and just let's say try to close them in some timelines in let's say small elements that have a start, beginning, and the end of it, so we can measure them. And of course, this is the same thing that we do with the design. So we differentiate at different phases of this design, which definitely allows us to somehow say about it in a way that we think we end some phases and we can move to another. So this give us this, let's say, feeling of limitation when it comes to the one phase or another. But to be honest, I wouldn't say that design should ever be ended in the way how we understand it, because this is an ongoing process that we perform in our projects in the products of our clients. This is ongoing process that should be not only started and ended in this visual phase as we understand it, but also when it comes to the maintenance, validation, and generally I would say adoption this design to changing environment that it's basically, let's say, living within. So I wouldn't say we can end the design, but I would say that having this idea of phases in mind, we need to remember that it does not mean that the whole design activity that you will need to, let's say, introduce to your company should be a full production work, which is, creatively bringing to life new things. It's not about that, so it's not going to be inventing new design each day, but it will be a process of ongoing maintenance and basically keeping it up to date and keeping it fresh and helping your company. So that would be my answer, I guess. I don't know, Michael, how from your perspective this can look.
I would definitely second that. I don't think design can be finished, so to speak, meaning design is not something that you do once and you just have it.
Yep.
One way you could technically end your design is if you abort the mission and stop working on your product, just abort the mission, right? Altogether. However, if your product is live, I don't think design is a finished effort. Similar to development, it works in a very similar way. You just have to keep working on it. And I think a valid point, and one that definitely is worth remembering, is that design is not necessarily constantly trying to dish out new screens, new colors, new information architecture, whatever it is. It comprises of many different forms of activities and things you need to do around your design in order to keep it fresh, usable, and great for your users. Your users evolve, your users change, trends change, and so should your design. It's never really finished. With that said, specific phases of design can be finished in time and outcome.
And both of you mentioned this concept of evolution. But I guess that with evolution also comes aging. And for example, in programming, we have this concept of tech debt, that once you begin to write the code and once you write the first line of code, it immediately begins to kind of become outdated, and you have to keep taking care of it so as not to let it become too legacy. Does the similar concept exist in design as well? Can we speak of something like design debt, maybe?
Yep, I would say definitely. In a way, like both software development and designing of a software, these are the activities that do not happen in a vacuum. So we have like time around us, a requirement and environment that is constantly changing. We have different business objectives around us, different audience expectations from our products. So definitely the idea of design becoming outdated in a way that it is aging, but in a way that it's somehow stopping us from progressing, is definitely something that might happen. And this is something that is happening from the day one. In the case of the debt, I would say in the design debt and probably tech debt similarly, these are the definitions that, let's say, sound very scary. And I don't think we have like a good associations when it comes to the debt in general. But when one, I would say, important thing in the regards to both of this and the design debt itself, it does not necessarily need to, once you spot it in your organization, it does not need to be an end of it. It's not that scary. I would say more scarier is the idea of thinking that you do not need to handle with it, because that's probably something that should be one of the first red flags of how you think about your company and the organization of the software creation within it. So definitely this is a thing. It is similar to the tech debt in some ways, and definitely not being aware of it is much more scarier and dangerous than being aware and being able to spot it.
And are there any, do you think, particular conditions that make this design debt faster to grow? Maybe the complexity of the product, or maybe the focus on features? What are your experiences in these regards?
Well, definitely complexity of the domain does not, and the interface solutions that we use to create and to, let's say, create this experience and just bring features to life definitely is one condition that make this design debt being a bit more is easy to happen, because each design will become legacy in some times, but definitely some solutions that might be a bit easier And definitely when we speak about modernization, we do not have them in mind. They might be less dangerous in that space. But when it comes to the modernization, and when we think about the domain solutions that do not that on one hand have outside, let's say, external users, for example, clients of your business, but might also have internal users, that being just people who you hire to perform daily work. These are definitely the places when the design that is much more happen to occur, I would say, in this kind of condition. So complexity as one of them, for sure.
I would only add to this that if your product operates on a very competitive market, it might be the case that competition will make design debt ramp up faster, because, well, everyone's just trying to top the others. Another thing would be to get to know know about your user base, your target user audience. If they are early adopters or people that respond to trends very well, chances are they will hop on to the next great thing, which will always be that one step ahead. But that's the one step behind where you are, right? So in that sense, you could easily distinguish situations which that is ramped up faster compared to others. I would also say that if you're in a stage in which you're scaling your product very fast, and you have a robust roadmap of implementation laid out for your product, and you funnel all of your resources and focus into that, it's easy to forget that you need to tend to and care for the feature set that you developed at the beginning that might have been left behind. So if you're in a situation in which you're developing and scaling the product very rapidly, that is also a situation. Those are the circumstances that I would say contribute to your design debt being ramped up fast.
And how about the business consequences of design debt? Because on the one hand, you said that you shouldn't be too afraid of it because it's not that scary and it's natural and it will occur eventually. But I guess there are some consequences that can harm your business if you don't react at the right time.
So I would say, if I can take this question, Jagoda, I would say the consequences that I've working with companies and clients, the consequences that I've seen could be of sort of competition nature, user group nature, or even internal. So, and with that said, it's quite difficult to say, what kind of business consequences will you see if your design becomes outdated? It's very difficult to say. Every product is at least slightly unique in its own way. And so the consequences, your results might vary. But in general, if going back to, again, if you're on a competitive market, the consequences you see, if you do not care for your design, if you do not maintain it and work on it constantly, you see your competition sort of get ahead of you. And you know, that while that's not like the only differentiating factor, taken into consideration when people are looking for solutions or digital products to use, it's a contributor, certainly. Your user base, well, design, how good design and how intuitive and usable it is for your users does have a significant impact on how willing they are to use your product, especially going back to the users that may be responsive to trends and early adopters. If they see a better solution, they will jump to it, absolutely, right? And internal, I think Jagoda would know much more about that because she is a designer. But internal, it might be the case that if your product your design is outdated, there's a lot of debt ramped up, chances are a product team, designers, but other people as well working on it would feel demotivated. For example, demotivated or feel discouraged to do their best work because every time they do, it just looks like it's been made 10 years ago, for example, right? And it isn't really that sort of satisfaction or like that kind of compensation for them when they do their best work. I don't know, Jagoda, would you agree with that last one?
Partially, yes, because definitely when we speak about this visual side of an interface, which is of course our first association when we think about design, it's all about visuals, then definitely it is a different working on something that is contemporary and something that you know that has been designed some time ago and might not necessarily be the case and no longer to be, let's say, how to say it, up to date, of course. But the business consequence I see from my experience in companies that I had we had, let's say, chance to see or observe. In that way, first, when your design become outdated, and the design that for some reasons, I don't know, these are different reasons as we spoke already. But the thing is that one of the symptoms that will be visible is that, or maybe maybe it is not going to be that visible, but definitely without up-to-date design, there is a lacking source of truth when it comes to creating new elements. And when we have like lacking source of truth when it comes to the design, for example, I'm not speaking about this visual side itself, but more of a wide components on how the user interface elements that we are creating, while, for example, making some style guides or components libraries, or, for example, design systems. So when we have this situation that we lack this single source of truth that is cohesive for a whole company, for a whole product, then it tends to generate a lot of noise, quote, when it comes to the product development itself. When we are not able to, let's say, fill our dev team with the tasks and with the roadmap of work that is easily comparable to the source and is basically up to date and allows them to work with their full efficiency, if we tend to question too much the things that we designed some time ago, this is one of the first signs that something is not right, because we spend much more time on discussing stuff that should be obvious and that should has some already, let's say, argumented background in the company. And instead of that, we are trying to find what is the most contemporary solution and why we cannot use the thing that we were firstly think that would suit best for the solution, for the new feature, or for the feature abrogate that we try to accomplish. So this is, in my opinion, very serious business consequences, because this is something that you can easily miss in a way of the symptoms, because you will be tracking your, for example, sprint velocity and efficiency, and for some reason it will be dropping, and you will be looking for the reason of it, obviously, in the, for example, develop tickets that you prepare for the development, or the process that you are developing your code with. But the real problem will be in this lacking source of truth that has the real origin in the design department. So this is the situation when I think companies can easily lose some money and team efficiency. So that would be something I would say quite important when it comes to the business consequences of the legacy design that we can have.
I'm really happy that you mentioned it, because we actually have the first question, and it's about the cooperation between designers and developers, but we'll leave it for the discussion. And you mentioned that these business consequences are serious, and I totally agree. So I guess our audience is wondering now, what's the best time to address these things? I mean, as soon as possible, probably. But if you were to, pinpoint some red flags, or maybe the best time to start thinking about modernizing your legacy design?
Well, one of the first, I would say, and the most visible symptoms that you can notice in your company is the situation when you easily spot that you are not able to create or implement new feature with your current design system or design solution that you have. So when your style guide is obviously lacking some elements, when the elements that were used in the previously developed or launched features are basically not handling the task well, this is one of the first, I would say, red flags that you can spot to start wonder maybe it's worth it to just get back to it and give it a proper review and maintenance, because the maintenance is a key in here. Of course, we would love to solve the problems as they go, as they come to us. But this is obviously not possible in many cases. Time will not stop and wait for us to modernize our tool and then just click the play button again and be the happy on the mark, and that's obviously not it. So I would say the most, basing on our experience, the most reasonable way would be to go steady with each new feature, each new update, trying to do a bit small work on updating the design solutions that we have, and being sure that you have a proper people to do it, that you have team that is devoted just for maintaining it. So being able to be up to date with that, not trying to, as we said before, not try to encapsulate it in some time and then forget about it again. So I would say that when you are not able to address a new feature or the new thing within your product with your current interface solutions that you're using for that, that's the first, I would say, symptoms for it.
I think that's a great point. I love the point about your style guide not being able to accommodate, not allowing you to accommodate new features, and I absolutely agree. I would say, I think this was said sort of together with the question, as soon as you can. I would say so. Ideally you would work on your design as soon as you can, or just never stop. That doesn't mean you have to work on it full time, employ a whole team of designers, 20 people to work on it constantly. That doesn't necessarily mean that, but generally speaking, work on your design as soon as you can, and ideally never stop. There are more red flags. I would add to this that when working with existing legacy products, when we first take a look at them and we do not understand what's going on, right? That's a red flag to me, right? If I'm used to looking at digital products, obviously, and I cannot figure out how things work, that's typically a big red flag. Another would be if, for example, if your users are finding workarounds to use your product, right? So if you devise a set of features that's supposed to be used in a specific way, but then your users find a better way to do it, and it becomes like an unspoken rule or a meme, even, like that's a bad sign. And so ideally, when you spot these things, it's absolutely time. But I see a lot of times, right? There are situations when you have to focus on one thing and pool your resources together to accomplish that thing, because that's a major win, for example. That's understandable. But then, do not ever fall for the trap of constantly delaying. Oh, we can do that later, right? We can do that. There will always be a better time to do it. Don't fall into that trap, because you wake up in a point that the design debt is so big that it will be difficult to tackle at that point.
And speaking of tackling, let me go back for a moment to this analogy between design debt and tech debt. So there is this concept of refactoring. So when you have some legacy code, you start improving it, so you refactor it. Is the same true for design debt? I mean, what's the best way to deal with it? Is there any best way? Jagoda?
It's a tricky one.
That's a difficult one.
Yeah, if there would be a great solution, we would obviously love to discuss it. But as the time passes and as the different companies that I had a chance to observe had various different, let's say, circumstances of dealing with that kind of situation. When it comes to the refactoring, in the case of the design, we would definitely start to think about this distinguish between this evolution or revolution approach.
Mm-hmm.
Different cases would demand different approaching here. I don't necessarily. It's very hard for me to imagine a situation when I can, in a project that is ongoing and has a group of users that are demanding to be basically served with the solutions that we are selling to them. It's really hard for me to imagine a situation when we are able to stop works, do the total overhaul of the interface, and then get back and expect that everything will go fine from this point on. So in my personal opinion, going with tackling the design debt in that situation needs to be rather steady and very much focused on the data in that approach. By data, I mean anything that we can do to monitor our user behaviors or our market numbers, anything that is really basically centralized on our users, no matter if these are external clients or users of our tool that are working in our company. So in that approach, anything that can be based on this data that we are able to gather should be performed step by step in the more steady approach rather than going with big changes. If there are any changes that need to be that seems to be kind of bigger one, because for example we had something that was that outdated, some solution, I know in the case of the navigation or tackling different stuff. When we are facing this kind of situation, probably trying to find a way to test it with users, of course, as an obvious part of the design process would be a way to go, and with launching it probably as some separate feature. If we have this, let's say, comfort of having a new feature being built and being able to introduce this change only there to make sure that we somehow kind of try measure the thing that we're planning to do in comparison to the oldest solutions that our users are used to already, that would be probably the way to go in my opinion. Try to be steady, try to be data oriented in the way of the user feedback data in this approach. I don't see right now any better answer that I can come up with, to be honest, based on my experience.
Yeah.
So you're staying in this topic of evolution, not really a revolution and tearing everything apart.
Yes, definitely being rather subtle with your users. No one likes changes, and this necessarily no matter what people will talk, they do not like it. So it's not gonna be the best way to do it smoothly, to tear everything apart and bring something totally new to them.
Michael?
Yeah, I would only say it's a very difficult question, but I would sway towards what Jagoda said. That it's typically better to be very data driven, very educated about the fact before making any decisions, and typically 9 out of 10 times go for an evolution rather than a revolution, especially with a product that has live users. Because, well, it's different for most user groups, but a lot of people are very resistant to change, or a sudden change. Making changes one by one is a good way to go. However, I would only add to this that if you have one, perfect. If you don't, get in touch with a good design team, because there is no, I wouldn't say there's a golden rule in it, other than what Jagoda mentioned, that be very careful about this topic. But other than that, there's no answer that can be given in a universal fashion that you should always go for this or always go for this. Perhaps your product and your user group would allow for a revolution. We do not know. So get in touch with a good design team, speak to them, and assess how much that has been ramped up. What are the consequences? What does data suggest? What are our options as far as time, budget, right? How much can we change? Do we have access to those users in an easy way to test things and to maybe reach out, get some feedback? Have you been tracking feedback? How much information do you have, right? So once you get in touch with them, it's possible to assess the situation and then come up with an answer. But as far as a universal answer, it's difficult to give, although the safer way is to go for an evolution rather than a revolution.
So as I suspected, the answer would be it depends, as is always the case.
Yeah, I feel like we're trying very hard to not with it depends, but it does depend on many things a lot of times. So.
Yeah, it would be rather naive to think that there are some solutions that are out of the box. In many cases might be, but in most of them, it's just, as Michał said, try to reach to the experts that are actually able to assess your situation and just consult it.
You mentioned this reluctance on the part of the users, because users generally don't like changes. And I know from my own experience that whenever I see any major change done, for example, to the interface, I immediately want to go back to the old version. How do you deal with something like that? Because you need to evolve sooner or later.
That's true. Well, I think the answer will be honest. It might not be the ideal or the one that we expect to hear when it comes to this kind of let's say consulting in this kind of setup. So definitely your product is brought up to the market and you would like to continue evolving or basically developing it in the way of the gathering more audience and being able to let's say serve them well when it comes to the software. I would say that is very very hard or maybe even impossible to tackle the users that are very let's say resistant to change. But there's one thing that we need to have in mind, that if your product brings them value, they will adapt. There is a maybe not 100%, but there is a great chance of them adapting. So it might be harsh at different levels of the let's say company stages, but when it comes to the value of the product, this is the thing you need to have on your let's say horizon all the time, right next to your users' needs. It is very hard to convince them at once, but there are ways to do that. The more data you have, the more you will know. The worst way is to basically just try it without any further investigation on how to do it smoothly. There are different solutions on the market or different strategies to do so. Introducing changes one by one might be the thing, the proper onboarding or the newsletters with product updates that you can provide your user with. Probably even a separate department of customer service that might get in touch with the user and be fully accessible for them all the time when it comes to to some features overhauls, or even giving them just a possibility to get back to the old interface, because that might be just the way in some cases. Just give them a period of time that they are aware of, let's say, I don't know, month or 2 months. I don't know how much it will be in the case of certain companies, and just allow them to mentally just change in the way of how to use it. If the product has this value and it is necessarily a tool and your audience is well adapted with that, it will be easier. I would answer in that way. I don't know, Michael, how do you feel about it? But there are no one-liners for this one.
Yeah, this is not a topic this is not a question you just answer with a one-liner and be done with it. I second everything you said. So going with the evolution rather than revolution, changes one by one, very important. Do not just throw everything upside down starting Monday when changing things. Go one by one. Monitor the behavior of users. How do they react to it? In order to do that, you need to be in touch with them already, right? You cannot. It's kind of assuming that you are tracking their behavior, how they interact with your platform and your product. Newsletters informing about changes ahead of time. I think Jagoda, you mentioned it. This is something very important. If you can have polls, just ask them, do they like the feature? Feedback. I think Google sometimes when they make changes, they ask for your feedback. They attach a feedback option to some new features. That's a cool option. Think of ways you can get the response to what you did. Do as much homework before you implement the change. Track behavior during making the change or in the immediate time right after, and then gather feedback as much as you can and do it one by one. It's a lot of work, but if you can afford it, if you can carry it out that way, that would be an optimal way for me.
And this is also the part when your design team should support you. So this is the way why this is one of the aspects of the design never being ended. It should be maintenance, and the method that Michael mentioned, like auditing your tool and gathering feedback in the interviews, in some polls or surveys. These are the ways of how you maintenance the design in the way of gathering feedback about it. So that might be the one of the shades of how you not ever end your design in a way that it should not be put it in the box and just put it in the shelf and being forgotten.
So users are one thing. So keeping listening to them, keeping them satisfied, but also giving them enough time to get accustomed to changes. But what about the business stakeholders? Do you feel that they are generally aware of legacy design being a problem, or maybe not so? So maybe the complete opposite, and they generally do not agree that it is an issue that should be tackled. What's your experience on that?
I think that we had this conversation some time ago with Michael about this iceberg metaphor of perception, of the design perception, that is sometimes, not always, but sometimes the case when it comes to the products that are going through some changes and need some attention when it comes to that in general, or some legacy setups in here. So I don't know, Michael, but you can, I think, very clearly brought it up based on your experience with the business stakeholders.
So to explain what's going on with the tip of the iceberg metaphor, it's something I came across working with different companies. Now, I'm not saying that this is universally the case. This can be the case. So for anyone listening, it may be the case. It doesn't necessarily have to be. But the thing we're talking about is that code and tech and programming effort in all digital products, if you have a product, that's easily recognizable as something that's fairly difficult to understand. So you imagine it is a mountain to cross, right? So you look at code and you think, okay, if you're not a tech person, you look at code and you see, okay, well, this doesn't make much sense to me, right? I do not know how to handle this. I do not know. You look at code, you have no idea of whether it's a good code, it's a bad code. With design, it's a mountain to cross. It's quite visibly difficult, right? With design, it's slightly different. Design, a digital product's design gives you the illusion that it's easy to formulate an opinion on it. And one of the most common things I see is that it looks good, so it must be good, right? And this is a popular misconception, because good-looking design has nothing to do with usable design. And good-looking design is a subjective term in itself, because it may be good-looking to one group of users and then awful to another, because the trends change, because the taste or what they're used to are just different, right? Which is why if tech and programming is a mountain to cross, the design is what you see and what you think you see in design. If it looks good, it must be good. That's the tip of the iceberg, because there's much more that goes into design than just whether or not it looks good. There's logic behind it, there's research behind it, there are trends behind it, there's mathematics behind it. There's so much that goes into design, and I see it because I work with designers such as Jagoda every day, and I see how much effort goes into creating a design like that, and it's so easily mistaken when trying to formulate opinion on it, which is hence the iceberg. And if there's one thing that I would really want people to sort of remember, that's that it's design is much more difficult to identify as good or bad. Much more difficult.
Yep, I would agree with that, especially when it comes to this subjective opinion of whether it's looking good or not. It might look great on one or two views. It might be totally unusable, not even for users, but even for designers, when it comes to the architecture of the design files and how the components are being made and what kind of cooperation was put in there to stay consistent with the tech stack that we are operating with when it comes to the front end and stuff like that. So there is, when it comes to the business stakeholders, sometimes there is the case that we as a people, everyone of us is a user in a part of their life, so we tend to think that we are designers in the same way. So we have this kind of knowledge, and this is great because it really shows how close to people it is and how it's really a part of their life. But on the other hand, when it comes to the business decisions about the team composition or the efficiency or effortness of the certain approaches to how to handle design within certain projects or product, then it becomes a bit more how to say it, complex matter than just visual side of it.
If you're trying to determine whether or not your design or just any design is works for what you're trying to do, works for your user group, works for what you're trying to do, is there depth in it, will it allow you to scale further? Speak to your designers if you do not have designers. Find them, find a design team, speak with them, get them to do a UX audit, check for things. It's not possible to assess design just by looking at it by someone who has not worked as a digital designer. So.
Okay, and we're heading slowly towards the end of the discussion. So my last question would be, how do you strike balance between being overly focused on business, on features, and being focused on users, on the usability, on the functionality of the design? Is there any golden mean? And if so, how can you achieve it? I guess it depends, but maybe you have some pro tips from your own experience.
To be honest, the only pro tip in that matters that comes to me in the way of the finding this balance and not being derived from the perspective of the users is just incorporating design to your daily operational process in your company. By incorporating design, I mean, of course, having the design team on board that is responsible for maintaining it and being in intact with customer success team, with the tech team, being just vital living part of the project you're working on, because this is the only way to not forget about it, I would say. This is the best perspective to gather it. So that would be one of the tips that comes to my mind in that approach.
Michał, how about you?
I would say, first and foremost, I agree. I would say if you're looking to strike a balance, not forget about that design and keep in touch with it. Just have a designer. Keep in mind that this is something that you should be tending to and maintaining in the long term. You always need to have at least your eyes on it. Keep in touch with your design. Monitor things. If you're looking to, there are absolutely times when you need to focus on scaling, but it's difficult to say because it's very specific to the team that's working with you on the product, right? Somehow there needs to be a way in which, at least in the time of focus on trying to build new things for your product, you need to have some time to look back and assess things, right? Having those focus periods when you build new things, there needs to be a moment when you take a break, look back, see, okay, do we need to refactor anything? And it can be even in the time when you developed a lot of things, you're looking to gather feedback. During that time, you can do some of the work, sort of looking back. Having a designer with an agile team, with a product team at all times, supporting developers, analyzing the traffic, looking at heat maps, gathering feedback, testing new features. It's always a good thing. It doesn't have to be a team of designers working on it full time.
Yes, it's not that, as we said in the beginning, it's not the constant act of creation that you do when it comes to the design the company. These are many more phases to it, and definitely each one should be treated with the caution in here not to be neglected. Just one of the tips: just treat the design like coding in the way of the hierarchy in your company. Of course, there are you cannot use the same methodology in the case of the, let's say, operating on this design or trying to how to say it, plan it, right, within the kind with the workload in mind, but just treat it on the same level of the seriousness when it comes to the impact on your business.
Yeah, and I would also add that don't look at design as a cost. Obviously, there's cost to be incurred, but it's an investment, right? Design is just as likely to bring you big money as development of new features. It's just as likely. So it's not just a cost to be had. It's not just a necessary thing to do. It absolutely there's big money in it for your product, and absolutely don't save on it. If you need to find space in your team, in your budget for a designer to do their work, absolutely do it.
So to sum up, the legacy design will happen, but it's not something to be too afraid of to tackle. So you will have to face it for your own good, basically.
Yeah, pretty much so.
I think that's one of the few questions that we can actually answer truthfully and without doubt, without it depends. Yes, that's true.
That's actually really the case that you can, in IT, that you answer it without saying it depends. Happy that it happened. Okay, thank you guys for a very insightful discussion. I guess now we can proceed to questions. So let me just remind our audience that you can still ask some questions in the chat box. So let me first maybe combine the two, because actually you have two quite similar questions. I can see that this topic of cooperation between the design and developer team is pretty interesting. So both questions actually concern the way in which you should structure this collaboration between developers and designers. And the first one is about how to do it to prevent design debt from happening. And the second one is how to, not make things worse. So maybe we could try to combine these two perspectives. So how to cooperate so as not to let it happen and not to let it grow out of control.
So as we kind of, let's say, answered in the beginning, the design that will happen. So you cannot prevent it. So you just need to spot it. You need to just be aware of it. And the moment you are aware of it, you can start tackling it. And when it comes, because I've seen that the question is related how to tackle that when it comes to the design and the development teams on the cooperation side.
Yeah.
So based on the experience and the best practices that I would use in that case, that would be definitely tracking the separate backlog of the issues that you are spotting ongoingly with when it comes to the design of the new features, or how you work with the components of the features that are already developed, because it's not always possible to just keep your design always intact and as a mirror, like reflection of what you have developed already. It's often just a waste of time, to be honest. So the thing that you need to do is definitely keeping the backlog of the changes that need to be addressed because of some crucialness, because they are crucial on some ways to that. And with that separate backlog of design that issues that you can spot out, the best probably idea would be to try to incorporate the single issues from this backlog to just your ongoing development work in here. Not everything at the same time. As each sprint happens, it's really hard for me to imagine sprints that I was a part of and has not any spare time or any time for just some small enhancement or improvement. So definitely keeping separate backlog for these design issues, and then trying ongoingly incorporate them to the backlog of the current sprint, or in what methodology you are working for your dev team. Of course, intact with the designers to be sure that they are there. Close operation with the quality assurance team members probably is also one of the hint in here that should be reflected and should help in that matters, I think.
Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I agree with what Jagoda said, and Jagoda referred to when she mentioned that she works with the team through sprints. She adds the things to the backlog. She keeps the things that she needs to work on in a separate backlog to always keep an eye on it. This refers to the way when we set up product teams for our clients, our designers work with them and with our development teams in a close cooperation throughout the project. There's a few pieces that we wrote on it as to how it works, but in general, the idea is that the designer is always present, working with the team. If they are not currently dishing out new designs, new screens, new components, the style guide is closed for now. They assist the team with implementation, mostly front-end developers, but also, like you said, quality assurance, backend engineers, maybe slightly less so, but still, they help with implementation. That way, they stay in touch with what's currently going on. If you just push the designers aside and they stop working on the project altogether, they lose track of what's going on, and they will not be able to be re-engaged in a very efficient manner, which is why they stay, assist with implementation. That's a very good way to do it. Another way is to, and this is something that I would recommend, but it's something more difficult to achieve a lot of times, is ideally you want to work with developers that know how to work with designers. Because to give you an example, right? If front-end developers, they work on, let's say front-end developers work on a further implementation, further scaling of a specific dashboard, there's new features to be added. If they already see that the features that they need to add to a specific dashboard, as a result, the dashboard will become overcrowded, things start looking off, right? They will know that, there's something wrong with it. Ideally, we want to have a designer take a look at it, right? So they will know who to let them know that there's something that needs to be adjusted. If they don't necessarily work with designers every day on a daily basis, it might be that they'll just they won't know how to deal with it. Not saying that that's always the case, but people that are used to working with designers know when to call for them when they see when they stumble upon a situation when that calls for it.
Yes, and this awareness should work in let's say both sides of this. So experience is not on user experience is not only a visual side, it's the experience side. So whenever you will came up with the new features with your design team and consulted with the dev engineering team, you just need to be aware that some compromises just sometimes needs to be done because, for example, for the performance stuff that needs to be in line with that. When we have some great solutions that will be just not necessarily that efficient in the case of the performance, then we should aim to focus on what's first, the visual side or the functional side in here. And in many cases, the functional side is the most important one. So the understanding of the when to call a designer when it comes to layout being overcrowded, or the awareness of the designers where to call the front end and back end engineers to basically help them with assessing which solution will be less impactful when it comes to their cost of work. This is also very important to have in mind, to have the people that are aware of each other's competences and when to ask for help or support.
Yeah, because collaboration is actually sometimes easier said than done. So it's good to take care of that.
In the area of Scrum and Agile being everywhere in the IT right now, it's very easy to forget that sometimes the communication is the key, especially when you're scaling up your business, right? And the number of people working for you is growing, right?
Okay, thank you. We still have 6 minutes, so if you still have any questions to our experts, please, now's the time to ask them. But in the meantime, actually, I have one question that I'm dying to actually ask you. So I know NDAs are a thing, and you cannot talk that openly about all the projects. But I'm wondering, what's your most interesting experience with working with a legacy design project? Maybe something particularly challenging, exciting, or maybe scary happened to you that pops immediately into your mind when you hear the term outdated design?
So in the manner of this idea that we cannot, of course, talk about specific cases, I will just mention one thing that is very common to each of the legacy design cases. It's definitely working with the files of different designers that we are inheriting or we are trying to contribute to as an extension, team extension in that ways. So I would say this is always the most intriguing part of working with the design that might be a bit outdated or be somehow inherited in a way that has not been taken care of for a while. Because from my perspective, the most intriguing part is trying to came up to the solution and the answer to the question and the process, let's say, of investigation that I do within the company, within the other design team, or the other stakeholders. The journey of finding out which design decision that design solution that I see on the files that I inherited or I'm working with other people, which design element is an effect of a design decision of a particular designer that has been working on that file, and which solution is dictated by the domain specificness of the product that we are working with. So this is always the most interesting part for me, the way of trying to get know the environment better. So to be sure, this is the lesson that I've learned like a couple of times, not to quickly assess the other designers' work when it comes to the design, legacy design, because we are never sure what were the let's say origin story of the solutions that we are seeing. I think this is also always the most intriguing part for me, to try to, let's say, make up this reverse engineering of the decision that has been made on some tools.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Michael, how about you? Do you have any, particularly scary or exciting stories from working with legacy design projects?
Well, as you know, I probably have a couple, but I cannot really speak and give particular examples. Although I would say there were a couple that I found really interesting, and they weren't necessarily scary stories. It was just fascinating to me when we were supposed to work on products that were built mid 2000s and weren't necessarily updated since then. And so like the design, the way things worked, they were so basic, but the products still were so robust in their functionality. Everything was very manual. So you are quite used to seeing very automated products, right? Part of the like the magic of the digital products today is that they automate things, they streamline things for you, they do things for you, right? They shorten the distance, they shorten the amount of time you need to do. That didn't do necessarily any of that. It was just like a digital notepad to an extent, and it was quite fascinating to me because I had this feeling that it looks like it's it looks like it's from the 2000s. It is from 2000s, but quite a magical. And then trying to reimagine it and rebuild it completely. It was quite interesting. There were a couple of projects like that. But in general, I would say one of the great things, one of the exciting moments for me is always this applies to new builds, greenfield builds as much as it does to legacy design. Re-envisioning it at the moment of, for example, prototyping, right? So after maybe a UX audit or maybe like a product design workshop during which a team works out requirements and sort of the direction to take with a specific product, when designers sit down to create the first prototypes of they set on the creative direction, maybe apply changes, propose changes, and prototype things. That's a moment when all of those requirements that I'm used to discussing for weeks on end then take shape in the form of for example, a prototype or a couple of designs. That's an eye-opening moment for me because it's finally something tangible, right? It's finally something. It's a tangible representation of a direction we want to take, and personally, to me, it's just very exciting.
Mm. Okay, thank you. Our live stream is coming to an end slowly, but as I said, it is being recorded, so you will be able to rewatch it. And if you come up with any questions, then also leave them in the comments. So we'll pass them to Michał and Jagoda, and we'll try to answer them as extensively as we can. And that being said, Jagoda, Michał, thank you very much for joining me today. It was a very informative discussion, and I believe our audience will learn a lot from it. Thank you.
We certainly hope so. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Okay, so thank you. And see you during our next software modernization live stream. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.